That is the Holy Spirit, right? Whew, I hope that's the Holy Spirit, because I'm getting tired. Whew. The topic of the Holy Spirit is one around which there is a lot of confusion in the world today. It's one of the greatest gifts that God has ever given to us, His children, the Spirit of Christ dwelling within us, and yet it's also one that is very much misunderstood as people try to reconcile what they read about being described and depicted in the Bible with what is being purported and claimed to be the Holy Spirit in the world today. And when you look, you'll find there's some big discrepancies. Now, if you think I'm going to even try to address all the many questions that people may have around this big topic of the Holy Spirit in one short video, I'm very sorry to disappoint you. But what I will do, however, is I'm going to address 5 key points that I think are very crucial and fundamental to you understanding this great gift that God has given to us. And before I do that, I just want to say, if you've not yet subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button and the little bell button so you can get notified as soon as new videos are released. And without further ado, let's get started. All right, so point number 1, the Holy Spirit reminds us of the teachings of Jesus. So this is so crucial to understanding the function and the purpose of the Holy Spirit. Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 26, that the Spirit, His Spirit, the Holy Spirit, will remind us of all things that He taught. And so when we meet someone who has no interest in the actual teachings of Jesus, the actual words of Christ, and yet they claim to be Spirit-filled or Spirit-led, or even worse, if they're not only ignoring those teachings of Jesus, but they're actively teaching and fighting against them, whether through their actions or through their words, we have to seriously question what spirit they're really being led by. The Apostle John wrote in his first epistle for us to test or try the spirits, and not just to believe every single spirit that claims to be coming from God. And so along those lines, it's so vitally important, it's so crucial that those of us hoping to truly follow Christ learn to discern that a spirit which is actively teaching against Jesus and actively fighting the actual teachings of Jesus is not the Holy Spirit. That's an Antichrist spirit. It's not the spirit that Jesus promised to send to His followers. So point number 2, the Holy Spirit empowers us to witness. As we read the first chapter of the book of Acts, the 8th verse, we learn that the Holy Spirit gives power to be a witness for Christ. And most of us know that before Jesus ascended to heaven, He told His followers to go into all the world and to preach the gospel to every creature. However, before He said for them to start that mission, He also told them to tarry or to wait in Jerusalem until they were endued with power from on high. We need to ask ourselves, why did He say that? I believe that the obvious answer is that He knew that they would need the supernatural power of His Spirit in order to be able to effectively witness for Him in all the world. So in other words, a big function, a big purpose behind the Holy Spirit is to empower people to witness. It's about witnessing. So if you see someone that claims to have the Holy Spirit, and yet you don't see them using their time or their energy or their material resources in order to witness for Christ in all the world, you have to seriously question exactly what sort of spirit they have. I mean, maybe they can speak in tongues, maybe they have a nice smile, maybe they can hoot and holler and cut a jig and laugh and roll on the floor, whatever they're doing to say they have the Spirit. But unless they're actually witnessing for Christ, unless they're actually doing that with their time, you have to question, do they truly have the Spirit? All right, so point number 3 is that it's a gift that brings gifts. You know, I grew up attending a Pentecostal church in Los Angeles, and I still remember how every time near the end of the service, when it was Holy Spirit time, the guy on the organ would play a particular tune, and when that tune turned on, suddenly one of the guys consistently in the auditorium would suddenly catch the Spirit and start running all around the auditorium in circles. And it was such an exaggerated form of being led by the Spirit that a lot of people could see through it. Similarly, you know, you hear stories of people barking like dogs or rolling on the ground and laughing hysterically, and these sorts of dramatics, they make many people cynical towards the reality of the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit today. However, I want to challenge that by just saying we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, while there are a lot of fakes and phonies in the world today, people pretending to have the gifts of the Spirit when they don't, it doesn't mean that God no longer gives those gifts. I believe He does. The real question for us is are we asking for those gifts? Jesus wants us to ask for spiritual things like the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit. And we also just need to be able to put them in their appropriate context and not to elevate things like speaking in tongues or being able to prophesy as some of the most important gifts when there are other things that are really more important for us as Christians. All right, so point number 4, this is true baptism. You know, water baptism is one of the main tenets of traditional Christianity. And when you start to question or challenge a long-standing tradition, people tend to get pretty defensive. Nonetheless, at the risk of that, here we go. So while we know that John the Baptist did baptize people with water, the Bible also makes it clear in John 4 verse 2 that Jesus himself baptized no one in water. And so we need to ask ourselves, why does the Bible make that point? The Apostle Paul shares in his first letter to the Corinthians that he realized he was not sent to baptize people in water, but to preach the gospel. And so we need to ask ourselves, what lesson can we derive from that statement? You know, in Matthew chapter 3, in Mark chapter 1, in Luke chapter 3, we hear repeatedly John the Baptist saying that he baptized people in water, and yet one coming after him, that is Jesus, would baptize people with the Holy Spirit and with fire. And so the thought that I want to put forward for you today is simply this, that water baptism or traditional baptism is at best merely symbolic, and that the true baptism of the Spirit, the true baptism of a Christian is that of being immersed or being covered by His Holy Spirit. And also that the best place to turn to receive that Spirit are actually the words of Christ, because Jesus himself said that the words that he spoke, they are spirit and they are life. All right, so point number 5, judge the fruit. This is the last point we're going to cover in this video, but I just want to talk about the concept of when we want to discern who does and doesn't have the Spirit, the ultimate litmus test is simply to judge the fruit. You know, when Jesus was talking about how to discern a false prophet, he didn't say to look at what they taught or their theology or their doctrinal statements. Rather, he said to judge the tree by the fruit. So whether, you know, someone has the best sounding words or the right church, that's irrelevant. What we need to look at is the fruit that is being produced in their lives. I think that Jesus could appreciate that sometimes people could say the right things and yet not be living them. I think he could appreciate that sometimes people could even do seemingly good things but do them for the wrong reasons. I think he could appreciate that sometimes the most loving or sincere or faith-filled people are those who are coming from the wrong religion or church or affiliation or group. And so ultimately what we need to judge is the fruit. You know, in the 22nd and 23rd verse of the book of Galatians chapter 5, Paul, the apostle, he does an excellent job of just laying out various fruits of the Spirit. Love, peace, joy, gentleness, humility, long-suffering, all these various fruits of the Spirit that he says we can use to identify who does and doesn't have the Spirit. And I just want to highlight in particular the importance of love as a fruit to look for in the life of someone who genuinely has the Spirit. You know, when Jesus was asked what is the most important law in the Old Testament, he says that love for God and for our neighbor is the essence of all the law and the prophets. It's what it all hangs upon. And so we definitely need to pay attention to the presence or absence of love in someone's life as we try to discern if they truly have the Spirit of God. All right, so that's it. That's 5 key points on the Holy Spirit that every Christian could benefit from being mindful of. So point number 1, just to recap, is the Holy Spirit reminds us of the teachings of Jesus. If it doesn't bring us back to what Jesus taught, if it contradicts his words, then it's not truly the Holy Spirit. Point number 2, the function or the purpose of the Holy Spirit is to enable us to be a witness for Christ. So if we're not going out into all the world to bear witness for Christ, do we truly have the Spirit? We need to question that. Point number 3, it's a gift that brings gifts. So the gifts of the Holy Spirit are still legitimate and still available for us today, despite the fact that there are a lot of fakes and phonies out there. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Point number 4, true Christian baptism is all about being immersed or covered by the words of Christ. That's so fundamental to actually being baptized in the Spirit. And point number 5, which is that we need to consider the fruit. So it's not about what people say, it's not about what people claim, it's about the fruit that's being produced in their lives. So those are 5 key points to help you better understand the Holy Spirit and how to discern it in the world today. I hope you got something from the video. And if you did, please make sure that you share the video with at least one friend, and God bless you.